Hi everyone, today I'm diving into Richard Borchelli's classic anthropological essay. If you haven't read it yet, it is called Eating Christmas in the Kalahari. Definitely recommend it. The core of the story, if you don't want to read it, is actually quite funny in a cringy fish out of water way. Let me explain. Lee, who is an anthropologist living with I am so sorry if I butcher this, the Kung Bushman, wanted to show his gratitude for their cooperation by purchasing the largest, meatiest, juiciest, fattest ox he could find for a Christmas feast. He found a 1,200-pound beast. I'm going to repeat it again. A 1,200-pound beast. But instead of being thanked for this, he was ruthlessly teased for weeks. The community was telling him that the ox was a bag of bones and that they'd all go hungry. Like what? So when the ox was finally slaughtered, it turned out to be incredibly fat and delicious. So these insults that he was receiving were actually a cultural mechanism to keep Lee humble, which was a practice they applied to all successful hunters to prevent arrogance from poisoning the community. Let's talk about the worldview and cultural meanings of this article. So this article is a masterclass in how worldview acts as a lens for interpretation. And from Lee's, Western capitalistic worldview, a gift is a totally generous, unstinting act that should be met with gratitude. Or at least that's what we usually all should, act upon, at least over here. But he saw the ox as a way to buy goodwill and erase the disparity in wealth between himself and the Bushman tribe. However, the Bushman tribe worldview is built on, I would like to say, egalitarianism, which, if you don't know what it is, it's like where people are all equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities and such. In their world, survival depends on sharing, and pride is a threat to their social fabric. And as Tomaso, who was part of the Bushman tribe, explained to Lee, when a man thinks of himself as a big man, he might eventually kill someone out of pride. And when I first read that, my reaction was like, but you're kind of right, Therefore, what Lee interpreted as malice or stinginess was actually a communal act of, and I quote, cooling his heart, to keep him gentle and an equal member of the group. Now let's talk about the ethnocentric bias of it all. The most glaring ethnocentric bias here is Lee's assumption that gratitude was a universal currency, is a universal currency. He felt like he had held all the cards because he was a source of tobacco and supplies. And his bias, eventually led him to believe that because he was providing a massive gift, again, if you guys forgot, the 1,200-pound ox, he was entitled to a specific emotional response, that being praise. When he didn't get it, he grew angry and almost actually left the site. He was judging the Bushman tribe's rudeness through the narrow window of his own cultural etiquette, failing to see that his generosity was actually being perceived as a display of power that needed to be leveled. So overall, he had already gone into this whole gift being unappreciated, when in reality, they were just following their own cultural worldview and doing what was good through their cultural etiquette. Let's talk about challenging the normal. Now, the story really changes our idea of what is normal. In my culture, if you give someone a gift and they call it trash to your face, that person is the whole villain. We're never going to see you again at family events. We're never going to talk to you again. Why? Why would you just be quiet, And Lee shows us that for the Bushman tribe, insulting the meat is actually the moral thing to do. It's their version of normal because it protects the group from the danger of one person becoming too powerful, becoming too egocentric out of pride. It makes you realize that our normal, like praising someone for a big achievement might actually look like encouraging dangerous arrogance to an outsider, or at least, the Bushman tribe. In comparing my culture to, let's say, the Bushman tribes, let's consider the whole American norm of, self-promotion or the elevator pitch, where you're like, you're talking yourself up. In our professional culture, it's considered normal and even best to highlight your achievements to get ahead. However, an outsider from a more collectivist or humble-centric culture, like the Bushman tribe, might actually perceive this as being incredibly boastful or even untrustworthy. Where we see confidence, they might see the seeds of a sheep who thinks they are better than their neighbors, and exactly what the Bushman tribe were trying to prevent in Lee. And so it just really depends on whether or not you consider the other person's cultural aspects or worldview, and honestly, I actually kind of agree with their worldview looking at it now. Best practices for communication. Now, based on this, a best practice for intercultural communication is suspending the emotional reaction to investigate functional intent. Now, what do I mean by this? When we encounter a behavior that feels wrong or rude, we shouldn't react immediately, as our instinctive urges tell us to. Instead, we should ask, what social function does this behavior serve in their world? And just look further into it. Lee initially lost his temper when the Bushman tribe joked about his ox, right? If he had asked earlier on, why is it so important that you think this ox is thin? Or why do you think that this ox is thin? He might have uncovered a lesson of humility much sooner, and we could have looked past the action, being the insult, and the intent, which was social leveling. Okay, so let me actually talk to you guys about a personal misunderstanding that I've had that kind of compares to everything that we've talked about so far. So I once had a misunderstanding regarding eye contact with a coworker of mine. In my upbringing, giving you guys back info, looking someone in the eye is actually a sign of respect, a sign that you're listening, a sign that you're being honest. When I spoke to someone from a culture where direct eye contact was a sign of aggression or disrespect, I felt like they were just being shifty, and this kind of mirrors Lee's experience with the ox. I interpreted a lack of eye contact as guilt or disrespect, which was my worldview, while they intended it as respect, which was their worldview. Just as Lee thought the Bushman tribe were being malicious when they were actually trying to be protective of his character, I misread a sign of respect as a sign of dishonesty, just because I had my own, upbringing on eye contact, just as they had a different upbringing on eye contact. Now, I know that you guys have been so interested in everything that I've been saying so far, right? Right. But we are ending the video. One thing I do want to leave everyone to ponder about is that the most significant lesson that we should all take from this is Lee's final realization. There are no totally generous acts. Think about that. Intercultural communication isn't just about, being nice. It's about understanding that every interaction is filtered through a years worth of social history and power dynamics. So the main message that I want to leave everyone off with is that to truly communicate, we have to be willing to have our hearts cooled down and our ego set aside. And I hope you guys learned a little bit more about, cultural aspects and worldview, and you take a little lesson from it as well. Thank you so much, and thanks for watching.